It was 5:08 in the morning. The sun hadn't yet risen over Sri Lanka's southern coast. A distress call crackled across naval frequencies from an Iranian warship, Iris Dena, reporting a massive explosion on board. By the time Sri Lankan rescue vessels reached the coordinates, there was nothing left but an oil slick, floating life rafts, and bodies drifting in the Indian Ocean. Welcome to today's episode. I'm Arnab Goswami, and today we are unpacking one of the most dramatic naval events of the 21st century. An event that happened just yesterday on March 4, 2026, yet is already reshaping geopolitics across the Indian Ocean region. I will divide the podcast into multiple chapters. Highlights of actual event. Did India knew about this prior to the event? Did India was informed after the event? Can Iran blame India for this event? Does it impact India's image of the IOR guardian? Here are the facts. A US Navy fast attack submarine operating under Operation Epic Fury fired a single Mark 48 ADCAP torpedo that broke the keel of the Iranian frigate Iris Dena, approximately 40 nautical miles south of Galle, Sri Lanka. The 1,500-ton Moj-class warship, Iran's most modern frigate, sank in minutes. Of the approximately 180 crew members aboard, at least 87 are confirmed dead. 32 were rescued. Dozens more remain missing. Few things has to be understood. The incident neither happened inside Indian territorial waters, nor it happened inside India's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Same can be said for Sri Lanka. The incident neither happened inside Sri Lankan territorial waters, nor it happened inside Sri Lankan's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. So it happened in international water, and since it was near Sri Lanka, the distress call was addressed by Lankan Navy based on international maritime rules. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stood at the Pentagon podium and called it, quote, a quiet death, the first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. But here's the twist that has every strategic analyst in Delhi, Tehran, and Washington talking. This ship wasn't just anywhere in the Indian Ocean. It had just left India. And India, the self-proclaimed guardian of the Indian Ocean region, says it knew nothing about it. Let's dig in. To understand why the US sank this ship, you need to understand the bigger war context. In late February 2026, the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military campaign targeting Iran's military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, and, crucially, its entire naval capability. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper said it plainly. We are sinking the Iranian Navy, the entire Navy, and we will not stop. Within the first 4 days of the operation, the US had struck or destroyed over 20 Iranian naval vessels across the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman. The Iris Dena was simply the one that had sailed furthest from home. Why specifically target Iris Dena? The Moj-class frigate was Iran's most capable surface combatant, armed with Qadr anti-ship missiles, vertical launch systems, surface-to-air missiles, and a 300-kilometer radar envelope. It was, in the words of a former US submarine commander, a threat that was mobile and hard to track. The US didn't want it returning to Iranian waters and slipping back into the fight. There's also a message embedded in the geography. The US chose not to sink this ship in the congested, dangerous Strait of Hormuz. They trapped it all the way across the Indian Ocean into waters traditionally understood as India's strategic backyard, the 7th Fleet's Indo-Pacific area of operations, hundreds of miles east of CENTCOM's normal battle space. The symbolism is unmistakable. The US is saying there is no safe harbor, no neutral sea, no ocean beyond its reach. Defense Secretary Hegseth's words were almost theatrical. An Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters, instead sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The gloves weren't just off, they had been incinerated. Now we get to the uncomfortable questions, the ones New Delhi hasn't answered and may not answer for a long time. And for this, I need to walk you through a timeline. Because when you lay the calendar out, the dots don't just connect, they form a straight line. February 14, 2026, Admiral Samuel J. Paparo, the commander of the United States Indo-Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM, lands in India. He is the single most powerful American military officer responsible for the Indo-Pacific region. His 5-day visit spans New Delhi, Chandi Mandir near Chandigarh, and Bengaluru. In New Delhi, Paparo sits down with India's Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Dinesh Kumar Tripathi, and India's Chief of Defence Staff, General Anil Chauhan. The official readout from US Indo-PACOM states the discussions covered, and I'm reading the actual language here: maritime security and domain awareness, expand operational interoperability, enhance information sharing, protect sea lines of communication and undersea infrastructure. Maritime domain awareness, information sharing, sea lines. These are not abstract pleasantries. These are the exact operational frameworks under which a US submarine would be authorized to track and kill a foreign naval vessel. Then come February 15th. The very next day, Iris Dena, Iran's most capable frigate, arrives at the port of Visakhapatnam for India's Milan 2026 exercise. The same exercise that the US Navy has also sent ships to attend. Think about that. The US and Iranian navies were literally in the same harbor at the same exercise in India, while America's top Pacific commander was meeting India's naval chief in New Delhi. February 16, Paparo and US Ambassador Sergio Gore traveled together to Chandi Mandir, the headquarters of India's Western Army Command near Chandigarh. They receive a full briefing on India's operational preparedness, execution of Operation Sindoor, and strategic security dynamics along India's western front. The Western Command's own ex-post confirms the visit included comprehensive intelligence and capability briefings. February 18 to 25th, Milan 2026 takes place. US Navy and Iranian Navy ships exercise side by side off Visakhapatnam. American officers can observe Iris Dena at close range, her speed, her radar signature, her departure heading. February 20th, Iran's own Navy commander, Rear Admiral Shahram Irani, meets with Admiral Tripathi in Visakhapatnam. He discusses Iran-India maritime cooperation. He has no idea that the commander of the US Indo-Pacific Fleet was in this same city, in meeting with this same man 6 days earlier. March 4th, Iris Dena, now 13 days out of Visakhapatnam, is sunk by a US torpedo 40 nautical miles south of Sri Lanka. Now, I want to be precise here. There is no public evidence that India deliberately passed targeting data for Iris Dena to the United States. India has categorically not confirmed any such thing. What I'm pointing out is the architecture, the systems, the frameworks, the timing, and the access all existed. Under the BECA, LEMOA, and COMCASA agreements, which enable real-time sharing of geospatial intelligence, logistical access, and communications interoperability, it is technically possible for Iranian ship movement data collected by Indian maritime surveillance to reach American hands without a single Indian officer ever making a conscious decision to share it. That is how modern intelligence alliances work. What we know for certain: the US submarine that fired the torpedo was operating in 7th Fleet territory, not CENTCOM. Pre-planned, long-range tracking. Someone had eyes on that ship from the moment it left India. And America's top Indo-Pacific commander had just spent 5 days in India, right alongside that ship. Draw your own conclusions. Tehran already has. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi acknowledged the sinking in a statement that landed like a diplomatic grenade. He wrote, "Frigate Dena, a guest of India's Navy carrying almost 130 sailors, was struck in international waters without warning. Mark my words, the US will come to bitterly regret the precedent it has set." Notice the framing, a guest of India's Navy. That is not accidental language. Tehran is placing India in the frame. They are, at minimum, implying that India bears some moral responsibility for the fate of a vessel it invited, hosted, and publicly celebrated, only for that vessel to be hunted down and destroyed days after departing Indian waters. Is there legal liability? No. Under international maritime law, India has no obligation to protect a foreign warship sailing through international waters after a naval visit. India is not an ally of Iran. There is no mutual defense arrangement. The attack occurred far outside Indian territorial waters, but the moral and diplomatic dimension is thornier. India has spent years cultivating Iran as a partner. The Chabahar Port Agreement, energy imports, connectivity to Central Asia. India's Milan exercise is explicitly framed as a platform for trust building and maritime cooperation. When India rolls out the red carpet for a visiting warship and that warship is sunk within 2 weeks in what Iran is now calling its backyard, there will be deep questions in Tehran about whether India's hospitality was naive, indifferent, or worse. India is caught in an impossible position. The US is a major strategic partner. Iran is a major regional partner. And right now, one has just killed the other sailors in waters India claims to watch over. This is the strategic heart of today's episode. India has for years articulated a vision of itself as the net security provider and guardian of the Indian Ocean region, the IOR. Prime ministers, navy chiefs, and national security advisors have said it in speeches, white papers, and international forums. India's Sagar doctrine, security and growth for all in the region, explicitly frames India as the stabilizing power responsible for maritime security from the Persian Gulf to the Strait of Malacca. And yet, a foreign power just came into that region, tracked a vessel for thousands of miles, and sank it with a torpedo. Without telling India, without consulting India, without any Indian response during, before, or after. Former Indian Navy Chief Admiral Arun Prakash put it bluntly on X. Sinking of Iranian warship off the southern tip of Sri Lanka with heavy loss of life is a senseless and inflammatory act. Initiating another dimension of violence in this open-ended conflict will spread alarm across the high seas and disrupt global seaborne commerce. Condemnable. That is a retired Indian Navy chief using the word condemnable about a US strike in India's strategic neighborhood. That tells you something. Here is the strategic damage assessment for India. First, credibility. India's claim to be the guardian of the Indian Ocean loses credibility if a warship can be sunk 40 miles off Sri Lanka without India's knowledge, consent, or any response. The US demonstrated today that the Indian Ocean is, in military terms, an American lake, not an Indian one. Second, the non-alignment contradiction. India has walked a careful tightrope between Washington and Tehran, Washington and Moscow, Washington and Beijing. The Iris Dena incident forces that tightrope into a razor wire. India's silence will be read in Tehran as complicity. Its inability to respond will be read in Beijing and Moscow as evidence that Indian sovereignty in the IOR is nominal. Third, the Milan question. India's flagship multilateral naval diplomacy just suffered a serious blow. Countries invited to future Milan exercises will now ask, if we come to your waters as a guest, are we safe? Is India actually capable of preventing a great power from tracking and killing us on the way home? That's not a question India wants its navy to have to answer. The war in Iran has arrived in India's backyard, and India was the last to know. But the most strategic problem is, if US submarines can sneak inside IOR without Indian Navy knowing about that, after all, PI-8, drone, and all sea denial assets, and signing COMCASA agreement, how could they track Chinese submarines inside IOR? Three things are the possibilities. India's surveillance system failed to detect US Navy subs inside IOR, and after the event, they are engaged in a military dialogue through back channel, just like 2020, and creating a trust deficit. India was apprised about this attack as per COMCASA protocol, and India remained silent and let this happen in India's backyard. And now, Indian and US navies are working on optics and naval diplomacy. India knew about the presence of US submarine and was not aware of the intention, as like most naval covert operations are not disclosed with allies. India came to know after the event happened, and right now India is engaged into escalated naval coordination with US Navy. In either of these three scenarios, India is loser. Tehran's response so far has been cautious but threatening. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed the sinking of the frigate and warned that the United States will bitterly regret the precedent it has set. Militarily, Iran is currently weakened after extensive strikes by the US and Israel on roughly 2,000 Iranian military targets, leaving the Iranian Navy largely ineffective. This makes direct naval retaliation unlikely, especially in the Indian Ocean. Instead, Iran is expected to rely on its traditional strategy of asymmetric warfare through networks linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Possible retaliation could include hitting US vessels, tankers in Strait of Hormuz, cyber attacks on US infrastructure, proxy attacks through militias in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, targeted assassinations, and disruptions to global shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. These actions would impose costs on the US gradually over time, rather than through direct confrontation. Iran has also hinted at pressure on India, noting that the warship had been a guest of India's navy. This signals possible diplomatic or economic pressure related to the Chabahar port and energy ties. Overall, Iran's warning suggests that retaliation will likely be indirect, prolonged, and strategically targeted rather than immediate military escalation. My final take. My take is simple. India is neither legally nor morally liable for this incident, as it occurred in international waters, not within India's territorial waters or its exclusive economic zone, EEZ. However, the perception and narrative that India has built over the years that it is the guardian of the Indian Ocean region took a serious hit on 4th February. If India cannot detect a US nuclear-powered submarine operating in the region or cannot predict or preempt such an event, it raises important questions about our maritime awareness capabilities. Similarly, if naval intelligence data is being shared under agreements such as COMCASA and LEMOA, India must carefully evaluate the sensitivity of such information and regulate the extent of sharing accordingly. The larger question, especially from the perspective of the China threat, is this. Is India's sea denial framework robust enough to detect similar Chinese naval assets operating in the region? If the answer is no, then we may not be in a very comfortable strategic position. Thanks for watching. This is your host, Arnab Goswami, signing off.